Right. Okay. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and he was planning on going on vacation with some of his friends, and they were planning on basically flying out some women who may or may not be escorts from another country to spend time with them while they were on vacation.
Uh-huh.
And because there's so much talk about sex trafficking in the media, they had second thoughts and they canceled these plans. And he was telling me about this, and I was a little skeptical in the sense of like, it seems like something absolutely terrible would have to take place in order for there to be any kind of investigation in this regard. And I was like, as long as you're not making it terribly explicit that you're paying these women to have sex with you, you could just be paying them to spend time with you. And it's unlikely that there's going to be any kind of record that would be able to directly prove that you were paying them for sex. What has to happen in order for a situation to be considered sex trafficking? Because I think that there's a little bit of a panic amongst certain men that like almost all sexual behavior in terms of just like, if you like, I had somebody on the podcast recently trying to tell me that if you fly a woman out to have sex, that's sex trafficking. I'm like, I think you've got the wrong idea about how this works.
I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't advise them to do it. And, there may be a panic among men, but women are being sexually assaulted at like 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 women. It's devastating. It can have profound effects on women for the rest of our lives. If we go out at night, we have to have somebody walk with us. If we have a drink in a bar, we have to keep an eye on it. Men may have to think twice about flying out escorts. I assure you it's much harder for women. What the definition of sex trafficking is basically recruiting or enticing women for sexual purposes when I'm trying to say it in plain language and not in legalese.
Right.
Tricking somebody, saying it's one thing, like come in and we're going to give you a recording contract, and then really you're expected to have sex. Yes, prostitution is illegal in virtually everywhere in the U.S. So if you're flying them out to have sex with you, that could be considered sex trafficking. I wouldn't do it. Why can't you just meet a woman in the town who consents to having sex with you and you don't have to pay her? Is that so difficult?
Well, many women would say yes. Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of, rich guys are kind of attracted to that sort of arrangement.
Well, I would suggest that they should comply with the law.
Right.
Because it's probably a better course for them.
But I have a lot of female friends who are escorts, and I see the way that they sort of explain it on their websites, where they're very specific about never having anything being put into writing that could be used to prove that they were actually being paid for sexual services, which is to protect them, but probably to protect the men as well. And it just occurs to me that like a lot of dudes are worried about this in situations where they probably don't need to be worried. And I'm talking obviously about completely consensual arrangements.
I hear you. And again, I think it should be legal. I really don't care what consenting adults want to do with their bodies, but it's not legal. So why cross that line? Why, I've represented a lot of sex workers, and they are often exploited, and they're willing, I think it's a kind of a new era where they're willing to come forward and stand up for themselves. They're less afraid than they used to be. I mean, it used to be, oh, you're a sex worker, you can't get involved in the legal system, because you're doing something illegal. No. I mean, there are sex workers who say, I will do, these particular sex acts, but not these other acts. And then the guy forces the other acts, and that's considered rape. And they go to court and they win. So I don't think I wouldn't try to advise somebody how to break the law, how to get around it, how to get sex workers in places where it's illegal. I think if you're a nice guy and you're a good looking guy and you talk to women and you pay attention and you smile, and you're going to get women the old fashioned way.
Even just being a good looking guy, that's kind of a high barrier to entry right there.
Is it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
well, I don't know. I'm not going to give dating advice, but I don't think it should be so difficult. If it's so difficult to meet a woman that you have to pay women everywhere you go, you might want to consider your life and the choices that you're making.
No, for sure. A lot of these guys probably know that they're not great when it comes to attracting women. I feel like the other main reason why escorting needs to be more, I say escorting, I'm just over here using euphemisms, but is because a lot of guys have fetishes that were they to bring that to the dating market, it would be very difficult to find somebody who wanted to partake in, let's say, your foot fetish. If you're meeting women at the bar.
But that's what dating apps are for. You put on your profile page what you're into. This entire dating apps for people who have particular fetishes.
Right.
Right? You put it out there, you meet somebody, and anyway.
Yeah.
Look, again, consenting adults, I really don't care, but I don't think it should be that difficult. If you have to pay somebody all the time to do the things you want to do, what does that say about you?
Right. Okay. I feel you. I'm married. I've never really taken part too much in the whole prostitution thing. But as I get older, the more I realize that it's so inevitable, and that there are, I know so many women who are taking part in this themselves as well, even though I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it. I got familiar with you.
Hold on to that.
Okay. I got familiar with you, probably like a lot of people, listening to The Daily a few years back when you did an interview in which you were talking about representing Harvey Weinstein. And then that quickly was also reported on that you took a step back from that. What were the charges that you were representing him on the basis of, and then what got revealed to you at a certain point that made you want to take a step back?
Yeah, so I didn't represent him on any charges. I briefly, I don't know, 7 years ago now, I think, represented him when the allegations were from some reporters that he had engaged in verbal sexual harassment.
Okay.
And he came to me and said, can you help me? And I said, are you willing to apologize and change your behavior? And he said, yeah. And, I know now that he's a sociopath and he's very convincing, and he pulled the wool over the eyes of a lot of people, including me, Hillary Clinton and the Obamas. The Obamas sent their daughter to go intern for him. I mean, if the Secret Service didn't know about Harvey, I didn't know, right? But as soon as the first woman came out and accused him of sexual assault, I said, I'm out. I don't represent people accused of sexual assault. There's a lot of attorneys who do that. God bless, they do that. That's their work. I don't do that work. I represent victims. I occasionally represented men who were accused if I thought the behavior was relatively mild, like just verbal, or I felt like, maybe there was some room for redemption there. After that case, because I was appalled at all the accusations that came out against him and just shocked, as were, the 100 people who worked with him at the time. I took my law firm 100% victim side, and that's where we've stayed ever since. We only represent victims. We went from like 95% victim side to now 100%. And I don't want to find out, again, that some guy I represent who I thought was basically fine is a monster like Harvey Weinstein.
Right.
And may he rot in prison for the rest of his life.
So that was similar to where we're kind of at with the Diddy thing, where if you were to rewind the clock by a couple of months, it was a lot easier to take the perspective of like, oh, well, it doesn't seem that bad, and maybe this is all overblown. But then, I'm sure we're still very much in the early days of what we'll eventually find out about Diddy, especially with those videotapes. That's going to be when it really gets crazy.
Yeah, I mean, look, we don't know until we know. And so when we talk, people have said to me, like, is everybody at the parties, going to be rounded up and go to jail? Well, no, of course not. I mean, people went to parties, they wanted to have a good time, and they didn't know. And they may have even seen people having sex and they thought it was consensual, and they didn't know that somebody was drugged or somebody was being exploited or forced into it. So I think we have to be very careful about what people knew, when they knew it. Did they take an act to participate? Were they part of a cover-up? Or were they just people who were kind of around who really didn't know? That's legally how we have to separate all of this out.